Welcome back, DP Review TV viewers. It's Jordan Drake here from sunny Seattle. We're here at Starfire Stadium, right in the middle of recording our full Z9 preview video, which you can also find on the channel right now. But I really wanted to do a dedicated video talking about what the new Nikon Z9 brings to the table for video shooters, because it is a huge jump forward for Nikon. Now, one really cool thing is Chris is actually filming me right now on another Z9, so you'll be able to analyze the video quality, get some more impressions from it. But I've taken a look at a lot of footage from this camera. I'm very impressed, and I want to show you guys why. So obviously the headline feature on this camera is that it can record 8K video, and we're not seeing any kind of quick cutoffs, nothing like a half hour. In fact, Nikon's actually saying you should be able to record up to 2 hours of 8K video continuously. We haven't gotten anywhere close to hitting that with this camera. But also you're getting some really nice 4K modes. 4K, it can shoot up to 120 frames per second. But also if you do 4K at 30 frames per second and lower, it's gonna use that oversampled image from that 8K sensor to give you super detailed 4K video. And I think that's how we're gonna shoot most of the time. One really exciting thing about all those record modes I just mentioned is that they're all available in 10-bit recording internally, where with all of the previous Nikon Z cameras, you'd have to use an external recorder for them. And there's a lot of flexibility in the recording as well. If you want, you can record H.265 files, which are actually very small, but they are pretty demanding on your computer. But one of the most exciting things is in the 4K modes, you can record with this camera in ProRes 422 HQ, which is just one of the most common deliverable types out there. All computers are going to accept it. It's not very efficient, but it's just very widely accepted. Now, this is also going to give you the option to record N-Log internally. However, we don't have a LUT for this camera. It will be different from the N-Log on the other cameras. So for that reason, I'm sticking to the flat profile for our preview video as well as this one. But, you know, the flat profile from Nikon is very easy to work with, very pleasing, and I think if you don't need a ton of dynamic range, it would be my first choice anyways. When it comes to the displays on this camera, I think that's going to be something that's pretty controversial for video shooters, because the Z9 does not have a fully articulating display. At the exact same time that Canon's R3, they finally put an articulating display in that. Now, they do have this kind of interesting four-way design on it, and when I'm operating the camera, I actually like it quite a bit, because I can just pop it back, adjust the angle slightly to reduce glare, and then when I'm ready to use the viewfinder, just pop it back in. It's very, very quick that way. But if you do need to film yourself, that is a real drawback. So if you're attaching an external monitor to be able to see yourself, that is one real advantage of this over the other Nikons. The lag has been more than cut in half with it, so now I'd say it's actually usable for pulling focus, and you don't have this incredibly weird delay while you're filming. And to plug that monitor into the camera, we no longer have to mess around with a wimpy little mini HDMI cable. We now get a full-size HDMI port, which makes sense because this is a very large body. But along with that, you've got a full complement of headphone jack and microphone jack. So there's a lot of stuff you can plug into this camera. Now, as far as video autofocus is concerned, I would say that Nikon's been making some improvements over the years, but this is a huge step forward for them. For starters, right now, I'm very small in the frame, but the camera is detecting not only my face, but actually my eye as well. And this is better than what I'd see out of Canon and Sony equivalents right now. But also, when your subject is moving or the camera's moving, I've found that the focus is very smooth with its default settings, moves very cinematically. Now, you can adjust the speed of that, which I had to do when I was recording athletes or bikes. You can speed that up. Unfortunately, it is buried in the menu, and there's no way to set that to a custom button. So you do have to set it up in the menu. So one custom button jumps to your top, My Menu option, and then you can quickly adjust it. But I'd really like to see Nikon streamline that, because this is a menu option you're going to be using all the time. Rolling shutter performance on the Z9 gets kind of complicated because it's using different methods to read the camera out at different resolutions and frame rates. But if you're shooting 8K or the oversampled 4K, that's 30 frames per second and below, then we are seeing a little bit of rolling shutter. I mean, it's under 20 milliseconds, so it's not going to be super distracting, but you should be aware you're not going to get the same kind of like insanely fast readout rates that you're seeing when you're shooting photos. However, when you switch over to 4K 120 or 4K 60, those faster frame rates, then it's using some kind of method like line skipping or binning. We're not sure exactly what's going on under the hood. That does increase those readout rates, so if you're really worried about rolling shutter, yes, you will see a reduction in detail with those modes, but but also rolling shutter performance is much improved. If you're doing sports, for example, that trade-off might be worth it. Now, unlike a lot of video shooters, I love using the electronic viewfinder. It's a very stable place where I can really get an idea of how the colors are looking, because you don't have to worry about the ambient color. Now, a lot of other camera systems are entirely dependent on the touch screen for autofocus. That's what Canon and Sony are doing right now. What I really love with this is I can use the joystick and the AF on button with their tracking interface and completely operate the autofocus of the camera without taking my eye away from the electronic viewfinder. If you're one of those people who works that way, I think you're really going to enjoy shooting with this camera. Like all the other flagship mirrorless cameras, this does have in-body image stabilization in it, and it works wonderfully when I'm trying to keep the frame totally static. Just looks really nice, like you're on a monopod or something. And it has a sport mode for that stabilizer, which works great when you want to do a quick pan over to your subject. However, I did find with both of these modes that it can occasionally fight you if you're trying to walk with the camera or follow an irregular moving subject. Can be a little bit jerky. I'd like to see some improvements there. Now, if you're willing to sacrifice a little tiny bit of a crop, then you can put the electronic VR on in this camera, and it does smooth things out quite a bit. Not a huge improvement when you're shooting 24 frames per second, but if you like to shoot faster frame rates, especially 60 frames per second for slow-mo, there I was actually very impressed with the results. All right, I'm kneeling in this position right now because Chris says it makes me look like a very athletic sport baller man, and I want to come off impressive in this video. I'm going to use this frame as an opportunity to talk about the Z9 for overheating. Now, this is a real problem that we're seeing with a lot of these high-spec mirrorless cameras. They just can't record in their most demanding modes for very long. And unfortunately, we've only been able to use these cameras on a few select shooting experiences over these 2 days. So I haven't been able to just sit there with a timer in a hotel room and check for overheating on them. But using this in a real-world situation and shooting tons of 8K oversampled down to 4K and 4K 120. I haven't had an overheat warning. I haven't seen anything like that. Currently, I don't think overheating is going to be a real problem on this camera, but obviously I'm going to wait till we get a production camera and run some proper tests. One thing Nikon wasn't really well known for back in the DSLR days was meaningful firmware updates, but that really all changed with their Z series cameras. They've had some really big firmware updates that have improved those cameras, and we're going to see the same kind of thing with the Z9. Nikon's told us there's a bunch of video features that'll be coming in 2022, and the biggest one is this camera is going to be able to record NRAW. That's Nikon's own proprietary 12-bit RAW format. Now, I hope we see a lot of support from it from all the major nonlinear editing systems, but it's cool that they're offering that. But also, this is going to become the second camera that gives us internal ProRes RAW. Typically, we have to use an Atomos Ninja in order to record those formats. Very well supported at this point, very easy on your editing machine, but the ability to record it internally means it's just going to be very straightforward to work with. So I've only had a couple of days to shoot video with the Z9, but it's been one of the most enjoyable experiences I've ever had. You just looking at the feature list and especially looking at the upcoming firmware, it's very clear Nikon is now listening to video professionals, and they're making something that's very flexible and very intuitive for us to work with. Again, this is just a pre-production camera. I'm going to do a lot more tests once I get a final production camera, but I'd have to say, in my heart, there's very real competition right now for the best mirrorless camera for video. Is it the S1H, the Sony A1, or now the Nikon Z9? Only time will tell. So absolutely be sure to check out our Z9 preview for photographers, because again, that whole thing was shot on a Z9, give you a really good chance to evaluate the image quality on this camera. Head to dpreview.com. There's lots of articles and sample galleries there as well. And be sure to join us for the next episode of DP Review TV.